I'm going to try not to do too much overlap for those of you that are in both of my classes this afternoon. Is there 2 or 3 of you that are in both? Who's in both classes? Someone else? There's like 3 people, right? So I don't want to make it so that you haven't listened to reruns. But there's I have a world religions class that meets at 4, and so there's I think we get 3 people total on the roster. Maybe 1 more here. That are in both classes. This is an interesting thing as it relates to what philosophers have grappled with since there have been philosophers. Whatever Halloween has come to mean today, and I'm going to guess that for really the vast majority of people, it's just a costume and mischief day that's just a time to play. I don't think that people, for the most part, there's some that put out on Facebook or preach some sermons or put out newsletters or whatever, that if you celebrate it and you're in league with dark forces or the devil or something. And maybe that's true for some people. Maybe some people intentionally conceptualize whatever they think of as evil and then align themselves with that. I mean, I know people do that. I've met plenty of people who are really open about that fact. But backing up, not just in recent history, not just even in the last few centuries or the last millennium, even further back, since there have been any records of people trying to figure out what's real, trying to figure out life, trying to figure out the universe, there's a sense that there's some things that seem favorable that they want, and other things that seem heinous and really unpleasant, and they definitely don't want those things. They want less of them or none of them. And that's a real basic way to say it. Things that make me happy and things that make me unhappy. Then there's the notion, when you extend a little further, there's things that make other people unhappy. Whatever they do to me, they make other people unhappy. And there's other things that make other people happy. Certain behaviors that I do, that you do. How different individuals and different cultures relate to that last category, that second category, is there's some similarities with most human beings because we share some common biology, and most people, almost everybody, with very, very few exceptions, most people have to have some sort of connection with other people. First of all, they got born. If anyone, you have a stem right here that you can look and see. You came from a vine. You grew somewhere, and so there's somebody you're related to there, and that person or somebody else definitely took care of you when you could not take care of yourself. So if that person was not responsible, or whatever people, somebody wasn't responsible to make sure that you got nourishment and you got kept the right temperature and protected from scavengers and enemies and that sort of thing, and you ate appropriately, then you wouldn't be here. So everybody has sort of from the get-go has some investment in relationships to other people. Also, there's drives that human beings have that the ancients were aware of, that our ancient pre-Socratics and our spa people were definitely grappling with, these things that make us want to do certain things. You say, why did you do that? Why does anybody do anything? Because you wanted it, or you wanted something you thought would result from it, or you didn't want something you thought would result from not doing it. Or you wanted somebody else to think a certain way of you. So in other words, you wanted something to be a certain way because you performed that way instead of another way. So some of those things we think about really carefully. We make long decisions, we get advice. Or they're habits that have been trained into us because we get a beating or a grounding or put away in our room or something if we don't do those things appropriately or if we do the things that we're not supposed to. And so we get a notion that sometimes it goes real bad for us. When I first figured out anything about Seventh-day Adventist people, I didn't come from a religious background of any kind. And for me, it was something sort of cognitive. I was looking for a group of people that agreed with me from what I was reading from the Bible because I didn't have any religious education or structure in the home to answer those questions. So I went looking from one group to the next, everywhere I could find a cross or a steeple or something, until I found somebody who told me I should go talk to the Seventh-day Adventists. They didn't have a cross and they didn't have a steeple at that church. But the last place I looked before looking at an Adventist church was at St. Peter's, a little tiny Catholic church in South Sacramento. And Father Grinnell said that I ought to go see the Seventh-day Adventist pastor and ask him the questions I was sort of interviewing the priest with. And so I did, and it's the first time somebody answered me in a way that made 9-year-old sense to me. Since then, things have made more than 9-year-old sense, but that was how I kind of got involved. And within a few days of that, when I first met with the pastor there, I rode my bike from our house over to Sacramento Central, and he gave me a big baptismal study guide for young people. It hadn't put a cover on it yet. It was some pre-publication thing, so it was done in like purple ditto copy, like all the school handouts used to be. Anyone who, because we didn't have Xerox machines at that time, we didn't have photocopiers, we sure didn't have laser printers, and we couldn't just upload it somewhere and have them send us a nice one of those Apple published books. That wasn't going to happen. So it was on purple ditto stuff, big old stack of papers with texts, and so I went home, did those things. He said when I finished that, then he would be willing to baptize me and let me become part of this church that I asked to be part of, and be satisfied with my 10 or so questions. And so I went home and did them all, just immediately. Without even sleeping, all night, all that afternoon, all night, all the next day, and then until about 2-something in the morning. And then he said, as soon as I finished, to give him a call and tell him. So he had given me his numbers. So I called, and I got an answering machine, which was kind of a newfangled deal at the time in 1972. They were actually cassette recorders, or even reel-to-reel recorders sometimes. And there was a message, and I said, well, I got his info. So I called him. 2:30, okay, I finished the studies. Now I can get baptized. He said, who is this? Anyway, I talked my mom into driving me there the next time, because he said that the next day, he said, I probably need to meet your parents. And so I was there and agreed to be baptized not that Sabbath, but the next Sabbath, which was my 10th birthday. And then he said, do you know there's a special school for Seventh-day Adventist young people? You could go to a special school. And I thought that was probably like my friends that went to catechism. You go in the afternoon to catechism, on the weekend to catechism, and get ready to get confirmed. And I said, well, I already did the lessons. And he said, no, school, like Monday through Friday, like from breakfast to after lunch. He said, but you had a special school. He said, yeah. I said, well, I'm going to be a pastor, a minister like you. So is this a place I would go to learn to do that? He said, this is absolutely the place that a 5th grader would go to start doing that. I said, fair enough. So I got my mom to drive me that afternoon to Sacramento Academy, and I signed up, and school was the next Monday. It was even going to be like 5 days before I got baptized even. And when I got there, I had this really bizarre cultural experience. First of all, it took about 6 or 7 trips to the office to figure out the lexicon at Sacrament Academy, which was different than Earl Warren Elementary School, the public school where I went. It was obviously different. That was really different than the way my mom and I talked. So one word at a time, and the SWATs for each one, I figured out there's certain words we don't say, and I didn't know the difference. I found out that the SH word was off the list, but that was like at least every other sentence at home, and I didn't get in trouble for saying it. In fact, I heard teachers, Mr. Katz, the library teacher, said it in class sometimes in the public school, and Mr. Hall, the coach, he said it. So that was the first one. I mean, there were some where I knew the line got drawn. I wasn't able to drop an F-bomb at home. I couldn't do that, and my mom, for some reason, although we weren't religious, I wasn't allowed to blaspheme. I wasn't allowed to say God's name in vain or Jesus Christ. That was off the table. So I didn't have to be spanked for that. But pretty much most other things, I required remedial education to help me one word at a time. And some of the ones I look back and I go, are you serious? You hit somebody for saying that? I never even stopped saying it. I just was careful to figure out which teachers were bothered by it, and I got that straight, because what the heck? Which was one of them. I actually got spanked for that. And dang, I got a spanking for dang. But there was actually, before I left Sacrament Academy, there were actually faculty and staff who I heard use those terms, and nobody spanked them. So I revived some of them. But it was really interesting for me to look at some of what was considered right and wrong that really was a surprise. Where did you get that? How come you think that's wrong? How's that evil? So I asked for an explanation, and the explanation was because we just don't say that. So it was kind of like, well, we do. I mean, you don't, but we do. And now you're hitting me for saying this. So I got the idea that it was expensive to say it, but I wasn't fully convinced it was actually evil to say it. Probably 5 or 6 weeks into the school year, I came up on another thing where Sacramento Academy's culture violated my morals. And I was aghast. Somebody taught me when I was objecting to him cutting in front of me in line, and I said, hey, dude, don't get in front of me. And so I moved in front of him, and he swung on me. So I handled my business the way I would have handled it in South Sacramento or Earl Warren. And I figured that would be the people on the playground were there watching what happened. They have some sense of right and wrong, I was sure. So I knew that they would do what actual decent, red-blooded human beings do on the playground when someone messes with you and you're handling your business. You make a circle around and try to make it so that either the faculty doesn't notice or they can't get there until you have had a chance to. Does anyone relate to that? You can handle your business. And so instead, I had already been swung on, and I only blocked it a little bit. It got me, some of it, the energy was spent on me, and then I was going at him to deal with him, and I've got 3 people grabbing on the back of my clothes, and he's got people like yanking him all the way, and I'm going, I can't get at him, and then there's like 5 people screaming toward the teachers to get them to come, and I'm going, what planet did I land on? Yeah, I mean, what the heck? I mean, didn't you see, and I discussed this at length with them. Did you not, you must have missed something, part of the story or something. Because, I mean, my mom would have been embarrassed for them to act like that. My mom would have said, what's the matter with those people? My mom taught me in the neighborhood to make sure that you don't get seen as weak, or else it's a safety issue. You have to be seen as you'll handle your business. And so that's what I was cultivating. So I of course ended up at the principal again, who It was that first like non-dictionary reason that I went to see the principal. And I had this discussion with the principal. And I said, I want to understand what I did that is the wrong thing here. So I told the story, and he said, well, so you admit it. I said, admit it, I just explained it to you what happened so that you'll know whose fault this really is. He said, well, we don't use any kind of violence or force or anything like that. I said, seriously, so if someone comes here shooting up the school, you don't call the police? So, well, of course I called the police. I said, what do you think the policeman was doing when he was in 5th grade? Do you think the policeman was not handling his business? They were teaching him not to? I don't think so. But you're calling him to handle your business. It's just you get someone else to do it. He said, well, that's entirely different. I said, I can't understand how that's different. And I left spanked and unconvinced. But I had a lesson. That's a good book. What's that?
Spanked and convinced.
Now I gotta sit on the publication rights. There, we're square. But it was really the first time though in my life, and opened the category of there are really differing, sincere opinions about what is good and what is bad. And that really bothered me. I really wrestled with that. And I'm still wrestling with it. I actually taught my own kids, if they were defending themselves, don't hurt anybody any worse than needs to be safe. But I taught them, you don't just stand there. I said also, if you see someone else that doesn't have it coming, and someone's just bullying, then you get in there and you don't go run and tattle and cost 3 minutes while someone gets a pummeling. You handle your business. I took them to martial arts and made them go to martial arts the way my mom did to me. And I remain perplexed with when I talk to people who think that when it's not like to prove a point, it's not like civil disobedience or religious persecution, it's just some thug, deal with it. Somebody's just being ridiculous, or they're trying to just cause somebody weaker than they are to get harmed. So I had to come to terms with the fact that I was going to be sharing the planet with people who saw not just this, but a lot of things very different. And I learned that some things that I thought were really good, even heroic, other people really were convinced that those. I bet that hurt. Is that an anatomy?
No, I just pushed it.
Oh, okay. Picture that. I was trying to think, is that a patella, or was it as electron process? That would be awesome. Doesn't that get you when you think about that right there, that little thing? That's so I was kind of having this vicarious feeling of him over there wincing, and I looked back and he was fine. I had to come to terms with the fact that even some of what I considered to be really, really evil, some people considered among their highest virtues. And that has never stopped perplexing me. I mean, I periodically obsess on what is going on, so that, I mean, how many steps are there, or is there something, are they wired differently or anything? That question, I'm wrestling in earnest with every neuron I can muster in my dissertation research to try to look at that from a neuropsychological perspective, to see if there's any way we can figure out how to cure. Well, now wait a minute, fill in the blank. Cure what? What would I be curing? If I impose my idea of what's good and what's a very nice way for somebody to be on somebody else, I might have done away with their whole identity, which might be partly based on the fact that they disagree with me on that. And here we are sharing the planet. with people who consider, I mean, there's no way that there is realistically any of us here that couldn't find people who, the things we think are the most evil, there's people who think that those are the highest virtues, that that's the way to really, really be a good person, and vice versa. What the heck do we do with that? Furthermore, people have grappled with, as we know, whether or not, since we already know there's things that we can't see, there's things that are outside of our realm, whether we're a mathematician or a physicist, or we are a medical professional, we're trying to figure out, how the heck did that thing spontaneously heal? There was no way. That was like stage 4 metastasis, ridiculous. It was in the lungs, it was in the brain and everything, and that was like 2 days ago, and the person shows up, and his scans are clear, and so's the labs. What the heck? I mean, things like that happen. Then there's people that have these weirdo things, like they're in the ER, and they code, and you bring it back, and they're describing stuff that's like up on top, clear up by the ceiling, like they're reading something or seeing something, a pen or something that was left up, and they're describing it, and it's in the literature, and some people have witnessed it, and they're going, don't do that. Whatever that is, do that somewhere else. And it gives them the shivers. Because things like that, I mean, obviously they're from a realm that we don't consider typically to be real, but they really happen. And they happen in a way that just saying coincidence doesn't get it, because that's mathematically asinine in many cases. It's just not true that it's coincidence. It's possible, but it's statistically ridiculous. And so we have to say, you know, there's actually a realm, and it's probably logically a lot larger than the realm that we can actually exist and feel and experience and see and be part of real directly with our body and our senses. But the next question is that realm similar to this one? Is that realm shared by intelligences? Are there some folk in that realm? Is there personalities in there? People, persons, intelligences, feelings, purposes? Is that in that realm? And if it is, this is where it gets worse. Is it like here, where the intelligence is in that realm? Some of them, their highest virtues are like treachery for the rest of them, and vice versa. So I would look at those folk in that realm, and some of them, or maybe all of them, I would go, oh, you are nasty. You are not good. Or is it a realm where everyone in that realm, me and you and everybody, somehow miraculously would, if we could see all those values and get their perspective, we'd go, yeah, they're all good. They're all awesome. We should all try to get like that. Now, you may have an answer to that. If you do, it's very likely that the answer you have for that, you have derived from your own religious tradition. Or you have started with your own religious or cultural tradition, and then you've made some tweaks, but for the most part, it would be recognizable by someone who knows your tradition and heard your point. But some of these folk that were philosophizing were in contact with people who didn't have the same culture. How could that be? How could that be? It turns out that when we look at these little towns where our pre-Socratics lived and sort of got some of these conversations started, it turns out that they lived in places where there was a lot of traffic at the port. There were port towns where people would come in, sailors, merchant marines, and they would have ports where people would come when they're moving there, and people, professionals, and people that come on the ship or that live there and get houses or apartments or whatever, or camps, and they're from that other country, but they're there to offload vessels that come back and forth and to reload those vessels. They're not Marines, but they're the longshoremen like we have today. They load and they unload. And like it is in Oakland, or like it is in Seattle, or like it is in many of the industrialized coastal ports on the East Coast. So those people kind of, when you move someplace and you're working there, or you come into a port and you got to wait for like a whole season to go by until the winds are favorable for your sailing ship, then they have to hang out. And you got to exist. So you start meeting people and seeing the sights and taking the tours and eating in the restaurants and maybe even venturing into places of worship and dating and all kinds of things. Maybe even find people to have relationships with and make families with. And so they found people that see the world extremely differently. And so some of these people were having to go, man, I can't understand how what I think is good, they think is bad. And they're also going, well, what do you think about, the stuff we can't see? Like, are there folk out there? Are there, like, magical beings somewhere else? Well, some of them thought there were, some of them thought that there weren't. And the ones that thought there were had very, very different ideas about what those folks would be like. The Greeks really thought that it spanned a whole spectrum like we do. Like there's some rascals up there, or out there, or in there, or whatever, however direction that realm is from us. There were some folk that were like vandals. There were folk that would come and occasionally, they weren't supposed to, but they would come and they would fraternize with mortals. Exactly. And sometimes they would even go so far as to make babies with mortals. And this would create a whole political problem in that realm for the Greeks. Now, interestingly, because the folk in that realm to the Greeks could be rascals and had a tendency to be, and other than an occasional person who would take an interest for some idle curiosity reason, or would come to mess around or sort of vandalize to amuse themselves, like when you were kids and you were breaking a window, because you thought it was funny at the schoolyard or something. The zoos. And many others, too. Other than that, they kind of had their stuff and we had our stuff. And how we behaved toward one another, what was good and bad, wasn't up to them, really. They weren't to be consulted, really, about what was good and bad. That was for us to work out. Because there's a whole different situation here. And they didn't even keep their own rules. And so they're not like in a position to be trusted to tell us what's good. So they didn't look to that part of their life to figure out what was a good way to do and what was not a good way to do, or what was evil and what was good. Now, there were people, intelligences in their pantheon. And that word pantheon, that's probably a good word to know if you don't know it already. Pan means all. And theos is God, so their pantheon would be the sort of speaking of the whole collection of their gods. That's probably not what the dictionary says, but it's what it means. It's kind of like when you speak of the whole group of them in that realm, all the folk that populate the realm of the gods. But they had a different way of trying to figure out what was good and what was evil. But there were among the pantheon some folk that they were afraid of. Because there's things that occasionally that some people would start saying, well, one thing you don't want to do or say, because if you put those guys off, this one is going to come and do this to you. You're going to lose your firstborn, or you're going to get measles or something. So don't fiddle with that. So it might be boundaries because they were afraid of certain things. And there might have been things where they felt like they needed to do something to appease them. When Socrates was executed, Socrates, and I want you to know this, what Socrates' reported last words were. Okay? Does anyone off the top of your head, without looking up, does anyone happen to know what Socrates' last words were? No? Okay. Socrates was surrounded by a few of his close followers or friends. Not Plato. Plato, for some reason, wasn't there. Some people think Plato might have just been sick that day. Or maybe he couldn't handle it. Maybe he knew what was going to happen and it's like, this, I can't handle this. I'm too distraught by it. I'm not going to be there to see it. I'll probably never heal from that. You know how sometimes you go, I mean, if you had like a brother or somebody, or you had an uncle or somebody, or a teacher that you'd been really close to, or minister that baptized you, or whatever, and they were falsely accused, and they were at San Quentin, and they were going to get the needle. Some people here would go, even though you were invited to be there, you would say, I'm not putting that memory in here. You know, I'll write him a letter. I'll go see him the day before, but I'm not going to be there when he goes. I'm not going to watch him go still and cold. Forget that. So Plato wasn't there. But for the followers that were there, trying to the last second to convince him to run away, because even the guards were hoping he would. And they had already talked to the guards, and the guards are like, yeah, if he happened to just slip out, we would just happen to just be in the bathroom or something at that time. Just give us a signal and our bladders will fill up right away. So they didn't want him to go. Even most of the people that convicted him, what they really wanted to do was just exile him. They didn't want to kill him. They just wanted him to get out of town and be gone for 10 years or something, which was, actually, he was given the choice. And he said, no. He said, I'm not gonna leave my city. I'm going to stay here and get justice. And they said, okay, well, then we're going to kill you. He said, well, do what you have to. So then he had all these chances to run away, and he said, no, I'm not doing this. Because he claimed throughout his life that what separated us from the beasts was thinking things through and making laws and then following them. Even if they weren't convenient for me at the time, I need to follow it just because I benefit from it too. It's a contract. And if I get the bad end of it, unfortunately, it's still better for everybody. So he would be nullifying, negating, making of no effect all of his teachings about how to be the right kind of citizen if he'd abscond from his execution penalty. So when he was taking the hemlock tea and he was drinking the tea, which was their lethal cocktail at the time, and it'll do it. I mean, you could find hemlock growing. It grows around here even, within not too many miles from here. You could make tea out of it and do yourself that way. You don't need like pills or rope or anything. But it seems kind of like a macabre way to go, you know. But he was already starting to get, faint when he remembered a debt that wasn't paid. So he said to whichever of his students was around, he said, we owe a cock to Asclepius, so a rooster. And there were prescribed sacrifices for certain events, occasions, good fortune, whatever, rites of passage. So he said, we owe a cock to Asclepius. Please be sure that the debt is paid. Yes or no? I think so. I'm going to try. It's Asclepes. Can someone correct me?
IUS.
Say it again.
IUS.
Did you write that for us? Say ASC?
Yeah,
IUS.
Oh, ASCLEP.
IUS?
Yeah, IUS.
PIUS.
Yeah.
There you go. The last time I heard it was in a lecture, and so I was imagining how it was written. But this was a God that was, I believe, the God of healing. Someone looked that up too. Someone who's got online connections, tell me what that God was the God of. There's a couple of things, but one of them I think was healing. Is that right?
Yeah.
The God of healing? Okay, wasn't there something else that God was?
I can check.
Yeah, see if there's something else. It seems like that a lot of the gods had double. Yeah, there you go.
He's the son of Apollo, so he's a demigod. What are you looking for?
Does it say he was a god of something in addition to healing? Hmm? Medicine, yeah.
Healing, truth, and prophecy.
Healing,
Truth and prophecy.
healing, truth, and prophecy. Truth. That might have been where the connection was. I'm not sure. And I don't think anybody knows. There's commentators who speculate. But I've never been satisfied with any of the arguments I've heard. But I'm going to go with maybe it had something to do with truth. Because, I don't know, here's my speculation on it, and it probably means just as much as yours or anyone else's. It might have been a statement of paying some homage to the God of truth so that the truth of the matter would come out. It's like if someone was falsely accused and they were going under the needle, you wanted to say something that would get under people's skin so they'd research it and you'd make your last statement and go, I didn't do this. And a lot of people have been executed and said at their execution when they're given the chance to give their final words, to say, you're doing an innocent man here. You're doing an innocent woman. That's a very common thing for people to say. So that might have been his way of saying that in an esoteric, cryptic way. So it's clear that even Socrates believed that there was, in that realm, that there were gods, according to his culture. We went fast over something. I do want you to know what his last words were. Okay? I want you to know that he said, we owe a cock to Asclepius. Please make sure that the debt is paid. I'd like you to know that that's what Socrates' last words were when we drank the hemlock. But one thing that we went fast over, and I only barely said, hey, it would be good to know this. The folk were getting in contact because they were living in port cities, shipping towns, with a lot of people from other cultures, and they were getting confronted with the differences between their beliefs and other people's beliefs. So it caused them to say, well, wait a minute, some of these people we're talking to from out of town seem like they're actually smarter than me. Why do I believe differently than somebody who is talking circles around me and reasoning circles around me? You ever met somebody that's so ridiculously smart that you're going, well, I just don't want to say anything, I'm going to seem stupid. They're just so smart, you ask them some question and they go, well, have you thought of, and you go, dang, wow. One example, Martin Seligman, he's the father of what we call positive psychology. Sort of this, don't study people that are crazy all the time, try to figure out the truth about the human psyche. Let's study some healthy people, and let's also figure out if, rather than just helping people that are bonkers and nuts, how to get less nuts, let's try to figure out some ways to help people that are pretty much going along okay, get to excellent. So he's I think he's from Penn State University of Pennsylvania, I think where he's been headquartered for the last few decades. But Martin Seligman was talking about a guy who used to be a Jesuit and who he noticed that whenever you talk to the guy and you ask him a question, you'd ask him something and he would hear you out and then he'd just look at you. And sometimes 2 minutes would go by, or more. And people are going, but he's got his gaze fixed. And then he'd give his answer really slowly. And he said, the one answer that the guy gave that prompted him to say, would you teach me how to think slowly? And that came from the fact that his teacher, when he was a Jesuit monk, had told him he needed to learn to slow down. He said, I didn't know how to slow down because he's always giving rash answers to things and they were half-baked and making mistakes and going on to the next thought. And his thoughts never really landed and really drilled into things. So he would give the guy one important sentence and tell him, here, sit under this tree until it's dark. And you think about this one sentence over and over and over. You think about one sentence, and then we'll talk about it tomorrow morning. I'll give you another sentence. And he did that for years. And it taught him to slow down and really take the time to think about it until something that wasn't just crap off the top shelf, get something really put together. And so he said one time to him, he said, where do you think our dreams come from? And after about 2 minutes, he said, well, where do you think our waking comes from? Man. And so Seligman said, would you teach me to think slowly? He said, that was actually a typical kind of response from that guy. And it's like, he completely put it up on its ear or whatever it was and turned it inside out. Whoa. So you'll meet people who, when you are considering some question together, they're like, boom, they bring something from another planet or something. And you're going, how does anyone think like that? Oh my gosh, I must be an idiot compared to this person. Well, they were meeting people like that disagreed with them about things that they had strong beliefs about and that were part of their culture, their granddaddies and the like. When that happens, that's upsetting. Have you ever met somebody who seems uber smart and you're really pretty sure about something, even you got questions about other things, but then they say, well, of course this, and you're going, what do you mean, of course that? You worry about it, right? You say, well, I thought this is one thing I was okay with. I thought I had that. And then they ask you something that you go, oh no. And then you can see they don't agree with you on it, and you go, well, he disagrees with that. He's got like twice my IQ. What? And he studied like crazy. You get with somebody and you get all biblical with them and everything, and then they start quoting chapter and verse and going all over you with theology, and you're going, oh, Jiminy Christmas, I can't, I got nothing. And then they tell you that they don't see it the way you do. You got to go away and go, man, they got the whole Bible memorized, and they disagree with me. And yeah, but Constantine, and they say, well, actually, and they start telling you, and you go, well, I don't really know anything about Constantine. I just remember hearing that from somebody, and they go way deep, and you go way nothing, and you start going, I could be wrong. I could be really ridiculously wrong. I better not say things in front of people that might remember that I said them. I might look it up. And it's really heinous now that anyone you're talking to, they don't have to be some Einstein. All they have to do is just get their phone out and Google them, and you're saying stuff, and they're going, well, that's crap. Look at this. You gotta be really careful. But it's just people, they don't have to get anything out. It just comes right out of their head. Go, and they disagree with me. So this was going on to cause these people, maybe one of the earliest recorded kinds of cultural cases where some really smart folk were starting to question things that they're not the kind of things that people question. And it just happened more and more and more. And that's kind of like philosophy's birth canal. It's kind of like how it got born. Possibly.
Painful too.
Yeah, painful, really painful.
With
some cases breach,
That's a really good analogy.
because people took their lives. And they took other people's lives. They took Socrates' life. They disagreed with him and the things he was saying. That's kind of painful when you die in that childbirth. Socrates died in that childbirth. That was a breach birth right there when he got dead.
A breach of justice.
It was a breach of justice. Absolutely. Okay. You worked hard for that one, and it was really good. It was really good. I can't deny that. So one of the things that people wrestled with, and you and I, if you don't wrestle with it now, you will at some point. Most likely, most people here will at some point, and you're going to meet other people who are wrestling with it. And that involves the problem of whatever you consider evil. Now, some people, the way they solve the problem of evil is to just say, there ain't any. It's all good. It's all good. Some people say, well, it's not really a matter of evil. It's a matter of, and Socrates said, it's just a matter of ignorance of the good. Because, oh, please know this. Please know this one. This one matters a lot. Socrates said, to know the good is to do the good, right? It's not the first time we've said it in here. It should just be in your notes. Somebody has it in their notes. To know the good is to do the good. That circles right back around and plugs back in as a reminder to this story we were talking about from the Republic when he was arguing with Glaucon about whether or not there are any people who are really good in their actual nature, or if they're just afraid of the consequences, so that if you remove accountability, everybody would do the wrong thing. They just advantage themselves and take advantage of other people because they're not really good in the way. In other words, Glaucon thought it was a fallacy or mythical, in the negative sense of the myth, like doesn't exist kind of mythical, to say that there were any good people. That we were mistaking somebody who was just like afraid of consequences and accountability for somebody who from their insides was really wanting to do the right thing. Now, if Glaucon didn't believe that there was any such thing as a good person that really wanted the good for other people, if he really believed that there wasn't anybody like that, what do you suppose? Is it safe to say that's a pretty good indication that inside Glaucon wasn't good like that? Right? And there's a very good possibility that Socrates, because he believed that there were people, and that once they figured out what the good was, they wanted the good for other people, it's a very good possibility that Socrates, on the inside, was really like that. Maybe conflicted at times, like all of us, but maybe he really was looking at other people and just really wanting them to have good. And wanting them to have better. And not be exploited, not be uncomfortable, and he didn't want to take advantage of them for his own good either. Very possibly. We don't know that for sure. Of course, that's the person's insights thousands of years ago. We don't even know that from the person sitting next to us. We're not even sure about that, honestly, about ourselves. If you would just entertain the thought for just a moment and say to yourself, just say to yourself inside, I really, when I look at other people, I always want it to go good for them. Even if that's expensive for me, in my heart of hearts, I want them to have all good. No matter who they are. Whether they don't have to like me, they can do me wrong, but I want good for them. Now, ask yourself, you really believe that? You sure? How far does it go? So, I think most of us are probably somewhat conflicted on that. You know, the problem that Paul talks about in Romans 7. At the very last part of Romans chapter 7, he says, I agree that the law is good, and we ought to do the right thing toward God and other people. And I agree. I'm not arguing that. But I'm going to tell you about another law, the law of my body parts. And here's how that law works. I make these resolutions to do a good thing. Say, I'm always going to do that. That's the only way I'm going to do. And then the next chance I get to do that, then that's not what I do. And then the other half of that is, I say, I'm never doing this other thing. That is out. Nix. We're done with that. And then the next time I get a chance to do it, I'm all for it. I do that thing. He said, that's me. He said, and then at that very last verse, he says, who shall deliver me from this body of death, from this death trap car I have to drive here? Can't get out of the car. Then in chapter 8, verse 1, he says, but thanks be to God that giveth us the victory through the Lord Jesus Christ. So Paul saw human nature, including his, as bunged up and needing to get fixed from outside. I think that you and I, probably almost everybody here, if not everybody here, is aware that in the Christian tradition, in the overwhelming most of Christian tradition, we embody the problem of evil with an originator and one who continues to promote it and to to lead an army of other people who agree with him, or intelligences that agree with him. And obviously, I'm talking about Lucifer, or Satan. So on Halloween, in the blend of Christian and I don't know how you could take Christianity and take out of it all that Christianity refers to as pagan or heathen, because you'd have very little left. If almost nothing left of practices or beliefs, almost nothing would be left, because it's almost always opposite the things in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John that Jesus said his followers would do. Christianity does not do those, and they even teach that you shouldn't do those things. And that the things that he said, some of them they think as Christians, well, that would be a good idea, but of course we don't do those things. If you read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, that's going to be scarier than any of the ghosts or skeletons you see today if you really compare what you know about Christianity with what Jesus said it ought to be. But I think that the blend, if we can actually concede that much to Christianity's definition of paganism and of itself, conceptualization of itself, the blend of pagan and Christian sees Halloween somehow as at least related to evil and the devil and the things that scare us about evil, things that frighten us, the dark side things. Do you agree with that? And that causes many people in Christianity to say, you have no business to get playful about those things. You have no business to dress up as goblins and fallen angels and zombies and Frankensteins and werewolves and vampires and all that stuff, and walk around scaring people and doing tricks or treats and all of that. There's all kinds of, you've probably heard this story, somebody's probably told you, you can go look it up on Wikipedia or look at a YouTube thing on it. You'll find all kinds of attitudes about it, but there was the Halloween thing was adopted from a tradition, a pagan tradition known as Samhain. I think it's called Samhain. Who knows about that? Somebody know more about that than me? Someone look at it so we can spell it right.
Samhain. Isn't that what it is? Samhain?
Samhain. Mm-hmm. I don't know how to spell it. Again, I've heard lectures, but I don't think I can remember seeing it in print. So I'd be guessing on the spelling. So I want to see if you could phonetically do a Google
Yeah.
on Samhain.
Samhain, but it's spelled like Samhain.
Oh, would you write that down? Was it from like old Gaelic or something? Is that right?
Celtic, yeah, Gaelic.
Celtic, okay. Yeah.
It's spelled Samhain, so Samhain. One word though.
It's not a dude. Play it again, Samhain.
Yeah, that's.
And it's pronounced Samhain. Yeah.
Mhm.
And that kind of got conscripted and turned into, kind of plug in some from Christian mythology or Judeo-Christian mythology, get the devil involved in that sort of thing. But there's a whole aspect, and this is wrestled with by philosophers in considering the problem of evil. Some philosophers say it's not so much a problem as it is just a description of polarity. You state one thing and then you state the other, like light and darkness. Like the yin yang symbol. The wave of the fish eating the fish and the wave and the eye, black and white like that. And when that symbol is put up there, it's not always black and white. It can be two other colors, and they represent contrasts. And sometimes those contrasts, not always, but sometimes those contrasts are things that we consider bad and good. But other times they're just things like strength and weakness or vulnerability, which are both good, but they're just opposites. Or brain and brawn. You have some people that are very strong, but they're not astronomically bright, and then you got people who are really bright, but they've got no strength and they're not fit at all. And so we see things, and that is sort of an overlay that we put on things. We put things on these lines and say, oh, this versus this. Now the Greeks taught that in their sort of moral tales and in their moral code, like how to be a good person, how a Greek would do things, is they believed in, and Socrates did too, nothing to excess. So they would look at a virtue as a balancing of two things, where if you go too far either way, then it's evil, it's nasty, it's bad, it's undesirable, it's a vice. For instance, a person who is, if you put on one side, you want to draw this up for us, like at opposite ends. Let's put coward at the left, coward and cowardice, and then clear over on the right, you've got recklessness. Okay, over on the other side, you've got reckless, and what's another word when you're reckless? You're like, is it impetuous and not exactly arrogant. It's not quite like that. It's when you don't think before you do.
Like impulsive?
Impulsive, that's a good one. Let's put impulsive up there too. Now, do you want, if you were a soldier, do you want to be led by a platoon leader who's a coward? Now, all the ways they tell your unit to behave is all based on being a coward. How about this? Would you like to be led by this man or woman? No. But in the middle, we're going to draw that and make it look like a scale, like a seesaw. And in the middle, though, is courage. Courage is not reckless. Courage is looking at realistically and with some insight at real risks and weighing those risks and going, but it needs to be done, and you go ahead and do it even though it's scary. That takes courage. Just draw, pretend these groups of words are kids on a seesaw.
Okay.
like that, and then put a fulcrum. And then right on the fulcrum, there you go, put a little triangle underneath it. Perfect. And then right above there, put courage. Yes. Right. Courage. And we can draw a heart around it because we love it. Right. And some lace. No, I'm kidding. It's not Valentine's, just that other pagan thing. Today is the other pagan thing. So, actually, not too far from that Greek, and that's just by way of example, because if you take all of the virtues that the Greeks identified, you could treat the virtue like it was the fulcrum, and you could put the extension of not enough that way or too much that way for all of the virtues. So all of the good was in the middle there. But all the bad was just having the wrong amount of it. So those things aren't inherently bad. It's just too much or not enough of what is the good thing.
Sorry, I'm gonna go off a little bit.
It's okay.
This on the that's the top of the $1.
Which-
Every-
Which thing? There.
Yeah.
There. Why is that there?
Every day you have different shapes on it.
Yes. Why is that? You remember we talked about how everything isn't continuous, but it's just made up of tiny little pieces of things, and that's as small as they get? Remember that? So when you think about how we make an image of something on that, there's really not a hand there. That's an optical illusion from little pins with little round things on the end of them. And that stands for, that's all we have. That's all reality consists of. Does that get it? That's why that's there. And I'm glad you have that page, right? It's a good question. So you can see that to Socrates, he didn't even believe that people could be bad. They just didn't have enough of the right information to give them perspective. And the way that what time did we get out of it? 22? Okay, good. We got time. The way that that Plato showed Socrates explaining that it was really a matter of perspective that made somebody really good, which to him meant enlightened, like a philosopher would be enlightened. He said that there was this cave. It was down in a hole, down deep in a hole, and there were many people who were put in this device where they couldn't turn their head, and it was like came out like this, and all they could see was straight forward, and it was like chained in place. They couldn't move, but they looked straight forward, and they're lined up all in a big long line, and they're looking at a blank wall in front of them. And it's very, very dark, because it's very deep down the channel that turns and bends in the light. You ever been in a cave and they shut the lights off or you turn off your flashlight? I mean, a real serious, it's like so dark that you can see the dark even. I mean, it makes it so that your retina starts producing little spontaneous activations of the blue pigment cones, doesn't it? Start seeing little blue bursts in there. Because your retina started to do that because it's like, give me something to do, doggone it. It's like when you get things too clean and your immune system says, all right, well, I'll eat parts of you then. You give it something to do. It's like a dog that's born to be a good guard dog, but you tell it to always be all sweet all the time. It's going to bite you if you don't get some slave work going on or let it chase things and do, it's got to get it out. So your eyes got to get it out. So that dark. So they're in this cave, and then behind them, a little ways, there's a fire, big, like a bonfire, and then there's some dudes at that fire that are taking They're making like shadow puppets, you know, doing the dog. Woo, woo, woo. They're making shadow puppets, and they've got little cutout things, like little silhouettes, and they put that in front of there, and then they're doing like a puppet show in the shadows. You know, have playing shadow. You ever do that with a flashlight when you're a kid? Or in the tent when you're a kid, you know, and then you try to bite with your dog, the other person's dog's ears, and all that. They're doing that on the back wall. They're doing a shadow thing. And they're portraying all kinds of stuff. I mean, some of it's like it's real mundane, you know, there's a dude walking, but some of it's, you know, like the senior sides of, like, you know, don't talk about it in polite company stuff. It's all getting put on a back wall. So these folk, that's all they've ever seen because they got put there the second they were born. And when anyone gets born, they get put there, and there they are. And they have never, ever, ever, ever seen anything else. And then, at one point, one of them manages to get free of the restraints. And he's going, whoa, what? He's going, the stuff we're seeing on there is just a big farce. Look at that. These guys are doing this on purpose with their hands and with the stencils. That's a big bunch of baloney. It's a conspiracy. Ridiculous. He's going, hey guys. And they're going, what? Say, what you're looking at isn't real. Yeah, right. Shut up. And why are you doing what you're doing? So he goes, well, how did those kids get in? So he tracks his way out and, whoa, Jiminy Christmas. He gets to the surface and it's blinding. What is that? What is that light stuff up there in the sky? What is that big fire up in the sky? And then he goes, Jiminy Christmas, it's in color and has depth. And so he comes down and he's going, hey guys. And he's trying to say, this is, you got it wrong. And they have no way to conceive of that. So they just want him to shut up, and they want to shut him up. And then actually probably so, for whatever sick, twisted reason, there's dudes like playing shadow puppets. Those guys probably weren't too pleased with him letting everybody in on the secret either. But they wouldn't believe him. They wanted him dead. So Plato portrays Socrates as saying that that's how it is for us in this life. That we don't realize that all we're seeing are shadows of something that's actually real. Or at least it's got another layer of realness to it. And maybe there's another realm and that's all there is, or maybe there's an infinite number or a certain number of those like dimensions you can climb back out of. But if you picture those people's whole notion was on a flat surface, they're looking at shadows. It's like when I draw stick figure dudes on the chalkboard. Now I could do like stop action. I could set up the camera and draw a stick figure and then change where it is a little bit and make its leg go forward and take another image and then image. And we can make the illusion, you can look at a screen of stick drawing where the dude is real choppy. Can you picture that? If that's all you ever saw from the time you were born, wouldn't that be a sick experiment? I mean sick in this, like really sick, not, oh cool, sick, but sick like you sick, nothing, that kind of sick. To take a baby, like, make it so that they're never allowed to see anything except, like, flat like that. They wouldn't have a sense of depth of anything. That'd be really twisted. But that's exactly what Socrates says we're doing, only we're doing it with the color in the 3 dimensions, but we don't realize that there's actually more dimensions beyond the ones that we actually can deal with our senses and our brains. So, it's like, y'all got this written down? Can I be done with this stuff? Okay. You get it? There's a good heart, too. So, back to what it all boils down to for some of us, math. When we talk about this, Remember this from school? From way back, elementary school. Remember that? If I tell you to plot 2 on that, you know how to plot a 2 on that, right? Yes? Could you plot a 2 on that? It's really hard. 2. There, we plotted a 2. But then you got a little more mature, maybe 8th grade, or maybe you were a freshman in high school when they did it. But they did a dirty trick to you once you kind of figured out, or not, the number line. Then they said, well, we're going to give that number line you're used to a special name. We'll call it X. But we're going to give you another number line. It's kind of like the last one, except it goes up and down instead of left and right. And we'll call that one Y. Remember when you got to that, and then the headaches really began for some of you? You had to go and get migraine medicine and stuff. And so then they said, if you're going to plot on here, we could say plot it. You can't just say plot it 2. That doesn't make any sense because you got to know what the Y is, not just the X. So you know how to plot a 2. So let's say they want you to plot 2, 3. So we say this is the X value and this is the Y value. So you say, okay, well, we're going to go 2 on X and then 3 on Y. Or you could do a -3 and you go +2 and then you go -3. And so you figure out how to plot that. And so there you have actually 2 dimensions. That's 2-dimensional. That's your whole chalkboard guy. Stick dude lives in the XY system, unless you let him move, and then he has X, Y, and he has time. But we'll skip time. We'll just pretend it's a snapshot and not a video. Some of you, I don't know how many, some of you actually figured much of this out, or didn't, and then they moved right along in whatever class they made you take, and they said, well, wait a minute, there's not just 2, there's actually 3 number lines. Well, I'm out of chalkboards. Chalkboard only goes this way and this way. So, no. You have to use your imagination for this one. This starts here, and it goes straight out, perfectly straight out, but it also goes behind the chalkboard out into the hall forever. It goes here, like out, not just forever and ever. And we call that one, so we have to pretend that we can draw straight out. You can't draw straight out because this chalkboard piles up so deep. So for this, we go like this. But you got to pretend, you use your imagination, I'm going to pretend that it's actually sticking this way, okay? And the one, when it goes behind the chalkboard, we have to pretend that this one sticks straight out through the back of the chalkboard and out into the hall. Or like we could have a chalkboard, one of those that's out on an easel thing or on a card, and then we can get behind it and like stick a stick through it and have it keep going with an arrow on each end. So we call this one, wait a minute, we've got X, Y, and what should we call the next one? Very good. Z. So when we get to that, then let's add a 4. Okay? 2, -3, and 4. So we'd start out with our X, 1, 2, then we go -3, 1, 2, 3 to the negative direction. But we also have to come the positive direction on Z to 4. So we have to move 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's probably exaggerated. Right about there would be 2, -3, 4, like right at the tip of the chalk. Comes out at us. Now that's in space, right? So if we want to go to another one, then we would simply add, is there anywhere else to draw, or can't even imagine another one?
Is it like you have to draw a right angle to that right angle?
Here you go. If you draw a right angle to the right angle, then you're going to be dealing with one of these.
Well, like
You're out of directions. You have left and right, up and down,
perpendicular,
and in and out.
perpendicular right angles. But we can't like imagine it.
You can't imagine it because it doesn't work in space.
Not our space.
Not ours. Oh, man. Man. Here's the thing. What you're talking about would require that we escape Euclidean geometry and we go into non-Euclidean geometry. Isn't that so? We're not going to do that so much, but what you could picture is instead of me drawing on this board being made out of what it's made out of, we'll picture it's made out of something that's rubber or elastic. And then we can blow it up like a ball or some other shape and print that thing on it. And then what we've drawn in this space as right angles will distort, but some of the rules will actually, so that's working in non-Euclidean geometry.
Sorry, can we go back to the allegory of the cave?
You're on it right now.
Okay.
We're on it.
Oh, we are on it.
We're
Okay.
talking about it.
Just kidding. Then maybe you're gonna get into it.
You better believe it. But we gotta have the tools, or else it won't make any sense.
The idea of the 4-5 dimension.
We're on that.
How do you represent that on a?
I'm gonna.
Oh, I was gonna ask, so, I think I was gonna ask the same thing too.
Okay,
like,
fourth and fifth.
How do we experience that? Like,
Good question. When we go to another dimension, if we want to add one more, we can't visualize it in space. But it's still another dimension the same way. These are dimensions, and we call it.
Parallel universe. Right?
No.
That's what my question was going to be. Then. Like,
We'll
is
come
it
to
not-
parallel universe. That's a very good
Because
point.
isn't that what he was talking about with if you come out and then
No.
go straight up, it's parallel.
Not necessarily. Maybe, but it's not the only case of that. There's a lot of ways what he said could be,
Sure.
and I just went the non-Euclidean direction and you went. Parallel universe would probably be out of phase, and we need to talk about time for that. So if we add the next one, picture chalkboard guy is a snapshot. Like your profile picture. We're going to move, we're going to change your profile picture. But if instead you got a statue, it still doesn't say very much, it doesn't remove. It's got 3 dimensions, but your profile picture has 1 dimension, right? But if you let it be in motion, like a person or a hologram, it has left and right, up and down, in and out. And in order to describe it fully, you would need to, like with formulas, and see, this gives us a place we can put a formula here. But do you remember when we used to do this? And I would say, remember that? You used to have to plot those things. So you'd put a bunch of trial numbers like this. And you plot it, you go, well, let's see, 2 times 0, and 2 times 1, and 2 times anything is going to give you, let's see, 2 times 0 is 0, plus 1 is 1. 2 plus 1 is 3, negative 2 plus 1 is negative 1, 4 plus 1 is 5, and negative 4 plus 1 is negative 3. So then you plot x and y. X is 0, y is 1. Well, you're going to find out that that gives you a line, because I've given you the formula for a line there. And we plot them and then join the thing and go, any numbers you could give are going to fit on that line. But once we get to 3 dimensions, then I'm giving you something beyond just a line that's flat. I could give you a line that is in space, that doesn't stay on the board. Or I could give you a parabola so that we've got x squared plus 1, and then it goes like this. But if I do it in 3 dimensions, it could lean out. But if I start getting more, and I can draw cubes and circles, and I can draw anything I want with just one little point. So if you take my whole body and you describe with a formula every little particle that makes up my body, as small as particles get, you have a formula for that, where it is exactly in space and when it's there. You could have all those formulas, combine them into one formula. You have a formula for every place and every shape my body will ever take on as long as I have a body. You can mathematically represent my whole life, everything about me physically, with one formula. It would be a matrix. And that's the math behind the movie The Matrix. When they say everything is just a mathematical matrix, I'm describing how you do that mathematically. But with time, you're not asking where it is only. You're asking when it was there. And that's a dimension.
Have you seen Interstellar?
Yes.
So that's what they're talking about, right? The fourth dimension is time.
Yes.
It's what they can
Actually,
travel
that's what Einstein was talking about, and that's what we
Right.
all pretty much agree. The fourth dimension is time.
through. Okay.
It is time. It's not science fiction. It's
So
physics.
is it the fourth? It's X, Y, Z, and time.
And T. That's
Okay.
exactly right. When you have a formula that has
All of
and
it just
T-
means the time. But then you can move it back and that's
when you have something like that,
saves a lot.
it's called a parametric equation. When you get time involved, it's parametric. It's not just telling you where the little dot or line or whatever is going to be. It's telling you when that point is going to be there in that function. And then you do that for every particle in the universe, and you've mathematized the entire bit of physical reality. That's the grand matrix. And that's a fact. There really could be, except that it turns out that the particles themselves don't follow simple, predictable formulas. At least they don't in 4 dimensions. So people are saying, well, they must in other dimensions, but we don't have any way to measure in those dimensions. We don't have the data, we don't have the formula, we don't know how to do it. Yes?
You said you were that we were asking two things when it came to time. What are those two things?
You were asking 2 things. Oh, you're asking when it
No.
comes to time, you're asking,
Like there were two
When?
questions. Okay.
but it turns out that every single particle, its when is different than everyone else's when, every other particle's when. So for each particle, you need a unique equation. And each one of those, t would not be like just time on the clock. You'd have t sub 1, t sub 2, t sub 3, up to t 10 to the 50 something, to get all the particles in our universe. You would then be able to describe the whole history of the universe, physically. You won't be able to predict it, but you could describe it. The prediction would require more dimensions because we don't know why particles, they don't follow our logic like this. But we can follow their logic. In other words, we could watch where it was and then write it down.
So how did they come up with the ideas of like minutes and hours and stuff like that?
Of what?
Minutes, hours, like
Minutes and hours, people came up with, well, it depends on which myth you follow, but for the most part, they were probably in their minds copying the rotation of the Earth to get your, like a complete rotation, and then dividing that into increments, and then dividing those increments into increments, and then dividing those increments into increments. Now, having different schemes, like whether you use minutes or seconds, or you use radians, which is like how many are around, that's just a difference. It's just a different scheme for describing the same kind of thing. So minutes and seconds and hours and all that is just a way of describing the circle for the most part. And then having a circle, it's calibrated to have something that moves around it twice in the time that the sun comes up one day and it comes up the next, or some point in the sun's rotation. So, now that we have those 4 dimensions, we can kind of picture time. We have a way to at least think about time. But what's the 5th? This exists in space. The space-time continuum is described by these 4. So that one's already taken. It takes we call time, and we only use 1 to describe, what we describe as space, and then we use 1 to describe time. So space is 3 dimensions, and time is another, but the whole thing is a space-time continuum of 4 dimensions.
I thought time was like, so if you had like a cup of water and you put like oil in it, I thought it was like time exists like across all dimensions.
Yes, it did. That's right. Until Einstein, that Einstein showed mathematically that that wasn't possible experimentally. In fact, if I take you and I, we each get a very accurate clock, like an atomic clock. And then we start out at San Francisco Airport. And then you and I each go around the globe, all the way around, and come back. But we go a different direction around. So it's like this. And we meet back and we compare our clock. The clocks are not the same. That's the simplest laboratory way, the most straightforward way that we can demonstrate that it really matters what your perspective is and where you've been. Because time isn't like you intuitive. Because, you heard the twin paradox? You take identical twins and you have one of them stay on Earth and you put one of them in a rocket, and that person goes out in a rocket for many years, going at very near the speed of light, and they turn around and come. They've each experienced the same,
Right,
but
the
then when they
clocks
come
are in the
together
same
and you
speed.
compare them,
They're going
but
to
it's going a different direction.
How are we able to know the fourth dimension of time? Because when you say like someone who only
With experiments like I just showed you.
But like if you can only see 2 dimensions and they can't imagine
You
3
can't see any dimensions. They're a construct. You can't see any
just like you
dimensions.
thought you understood.
If you can, what color is it? What color is height?
Okay, you can't see it. If you
Can't
can
see any of them.
understand like a 4th dimension, like
Then why can't we do the 5th?
well sure, but also like why people who only know 2 dimensions, like oh they have no idea.
If I hand you an
how
old shopping calculator that only does adding and subtracting, multiplying, dividing, and then I ask you to graph something on it, how's that going to go for you?
You're graphing anything isn't
You're
gonna
not going to graph it because it can't graph. All it does is numbers. What if I ask you to type a word processing document and spell your name on it? You can turn it upside down and say shell, or if it has scientific notation, you can say oh hell. Like when I was 14 and got I got a scientific notation calculator, I figured out a formula to come up with that so I could make a little joke and say the answer was oh hell, but you turn it upside down. But other than playing games with the numbers, we can't do letters on it. Probably the reason that our mind can't conceive of more than 4 is that the computer in our mind is actually only equipped with the calculation ability, with the construct, with the matrix structure to handle that many dimensions in a formula. We can't conceivify, just like stick guy can't do better than flatland. But Socrates said that a philosopher goes outside of our 4 dimensions somehow and gets the idea that there's more than what we can conceive of. Yep. What is the title of today's lecture? Well, we went lots of places. They have lots of titles. You make one up. What was it? This, to go from where we started to where we stopped. And we're right on. It helps to make your plan really close to the end. Nobody would understand this? Oh, yes. Yeah, well.